so that we will identify and support 50 young curators from both sides of the Atlantic. The American Fellows for 2023 will be selected.
History, I think it would be difficult. I constantly place this institution where I work into its very large history, and I always say that my goal or my model is Alexandre Brognard, who actually founded the museum at the beginning of the 19th century. So it's the relationship with history is very important, and I think I have that because I'm an art historian, and I think that way.
You know, I was going to follow up by talking about asking you if you felt that being a scholar really made a difference to leadership. And before we began, Charlotte was talking about the fact that she is the only museum director in France not to have taken this famous or infamous, look at all the people nodding, the concours, which is a terrifying exam that 900 people take and then 2 pass and they become civil servants and they have jobs for the rest of their lives. But do you want to talk about that just for a tiny minute about the decision you made because it was for your scholarship?
Yeah, I did. I left France when I was at my master degree level in art history in Paris, because I refused actually to pass that concours because I wanted to pursue scholarship. In France, when you have the concours, you become civil servant, and usually your first job, you don't choose your first position. So you could be driven or interested in contemporary art, and suddenly your first job will be in archaeology museum, etc. And that first job actually kind of defined your career after. And I was, stubborn, and I just wanted to continue my love in 18th century decorative arts and furniture, and I wanted to pursue that scholarship. And I have a very good friend at the time who is now the director of the Capo di Monte, Sylvain Bélanger, who told me, he's French, so you perfectly well the system. And he said, you in the States, it's different. Actually, you need a PhD to be a director very often, and they value scholarship, and you can choose more easily the institution in which you want to work. So you have so I moved, and I went to the US, first as a fellow at Cleveland, and after other fellowships at the Met, the Frick, but it was definitely scholarship that brought me into the US. I wanted to.
Well, it's an important thing to keep at the top of your head, because I think you can always tell a museum director who's been a curator and been a scholar, as opposed to others who are put in directorial positions. Would you agree?
Yes.
Very good. So my next question is going to turn to the fact that both of you run museums that deal with the history of art in its past, and that have long histories. And Courtney runs the Yale Center for British Art, which is the largest repository of English art outside of Great Britain, and there's the Tate Britain in England, but that you're kind of it. So with the pressure and your own expertise in contemporary art, how do you make that historical collection come alive?
Oh, it's so incredibly easy.
There you go.
No, it
You're
really,
Courtney.
it really is, because first of all, it is an incredible collection. And I can say this in this way because I came into this position with some pre-knowledge. I worked at the museum when I was a graduate student, and I was a graduate student at Yale because I wanted to do British art, and the museum was a big part of my training. And so I did not go there saying, I'm going to do something else here. I went there for the collection that existed. And so in many ways, I'm not being glib in saying that it was easy. I actually have such an affinity for it. And I want other people to feel its resonance. I want other people to be excited about it. I want them to see the same things. I want them, I want people to see Turner and to feel as if there is a conversation of abstraction that we have not stopped having. I want people to see Reynolds and to ask questions about why we have returned to the same kind of portraiture in the last 5 years. I want all of those things, to be top of the mind as they look at the things that we have and not say, oh, that's distant from me because, it happened 200, 300 years ago.
Well, that puts you in a unique position to run that museum because you are the person who has the contemporary discourse. So how do you do that? I mean, I will say the galleries are now closed, so you have a while to rethink the new installation when you reopen. But so how did you inflect that contemporary resonance within the historical galleries, or what did you do?
So we are closed right now, but we have basically a collection highlights exhibition that's on view across the street at the Yale University Art Gallery. And that show will be on view at exactly the same time as a Mickaleen Thomas show that will open later in the summer. That for me feels like the exact perfect pairing because before we closed and before the pandemic, we had begun to show our 17th through 19th century works alongside more modernist and also contemporary artists. And not in an effort, I think, to say, come see this and sort of pick up the rest, but to say there's a dialogue that's happening. We have also invited in contemporary British artists, living British artists, to talk about our collection, because one of the things that, for all of us who are familiar with artists and are comfortable with artists, that they're looking at as much historical art as they're looking at what's around them now. And they immediately go to the oldest parts of the collection. they immediately pull out the things that you think, wow, you know, why is that relevant now? They see it and they tell us.
So Charlotte, Sèvres was created by Louis XV. That's a big history. And so faced with an older history and a royal history, how are you addressing that in terms of the concerns of today?
So the manufactory was created by Louis XV. The museum was created almost a century later by the director of the then manufactory, Alexandre Brongniart, in 1824. So it's, but still, long history, and indeed, we still today a very close connection to power. So because some of my collection is ceramic from antiquity to today, from all over the world, but we also have a very important part of the collection, more than 2,000 works, items, that are dispatched all over, maybe also probably some here in this building, on long-term loan to institutions, diplomatic embassies, Élysée, etc. So it's a very large and complex collection. And I think that what makes it relevant is the manufactory has always worked, and the collection of the museum was created by Alexandre Brongniart to be an inspiration for the artists. So let's say in 1824, Brongniart created this collection with antique ceramic to inspire the artisans who were working then at the manufacturing. And still today we collect works of art, and we have collections of works again from all over the world, from all time in history, to inspire artists. So I share with Courtney this idea that I want the public to be as excited as I am about ceramic. And I want to see people excited about the maiolica and understand the beauty and its importance. I think and that's why it's important that we're a scholar and we know about the important historical, the aesthetic value of this object. But sometimes it's easier, we cannot really do it with a traditional scholarship. And it's interesting, it has been done by the past and by many institutions, to have what I say, the eyes of contemporary artists, to help our public to look at this object through their creation also. And I did it, I think, very successfully at the Frick with Arlene Chequet looking at the Mason. I did it with Edmond Deval looking at the main collection. And I think at Sèvres it's the same thing, but the manufacturer is doing it because we continue to work with contemporary artists that look at the collection as inspiration. And they come in the galleries and it's become this ongoing source of creation.
Because you think of contemporary art today, Simone Lee, who represented the United States at the Venice Biennale, works with clay. And you just think that no longer, well, not that it ever was necessarily, but it doesn't have to be paintings that represent contemporary art and the engagement. And even when the Met did its ceramics from the South, I think people are very attuned in a new way.
I mean, ceramic is one of the oldest, it's a medium, it's a material, and has been used by all civilization, and many artists have used it as a medium of expression or continue to use it. From Picasso, Calder, Jules Leparc, I mean everybody. Everybody is intrigued by this material. With it's a very biblical material too. It's a very antique. I mean, it's clay. It's the origin of the world. Is you just take clay and you build something out of it. So it's fascinating. It's transformative, and it's a source of an interesting moment now to contemporary art.
So I would like to go back just a tiny bit. Both of you began your directorships, your first directorships. You were new directors, both of you, in 2019, more or less. And then COVID hit. So I know when you're interviewed for a big job, you have to say, this is my dream, this is my program. and then COVID hits. So you had to switch gears. And I'm just curious now, that vision that you had at the beginning of, this is a series on women leaders. So that vision that you had in the beginning, how did COVID change it? Did it change it? How did that impact what you're doing?
I think that COVID happened to everybody. And that's an obvious thing to say, but I say it in the sense that, often I have a conversation where people say, oh, it must have been horrible to have started a new job and, you had to leave and go home and close it. And I said, but any job that I had, that would have happened. And so there's a way in which an acceptance that the entire world was affected actually feels better than individually being affected. And the reason that I can say that so clearly is because I had lived through other things that I felt were really, truly challenging, and part of the challenge was the isolation. So living in New York immediately after 9/11 was sometimes challenging when the rest of the country seemed to move on. I worked in New Orleans for the Ford Foundation immediately following the Hurricane Katrina. And watching everyone else seem to feel as if everything was okay, it was really hard to come back and forth and be inside and out of that. And yet, talking to colleagues across the world, talking to artists daily, made me realize during the 2 years that we really spent at home that I actually wasn't alone in this sense. And I felt a better sense of kind of community in a way that I hadn't in those other things that felt really personally problematic.
So this just dawned on me. Do you think you did about the best lecture series of any that I listened to? And we all listen to lecture series. But the Yale Center for British Art just had these conversations between artists that were seismic, I thought. And do you think that being closed down enabled you to break through sort of boundaries about what is British, is this British or not, that you couldn't have done necessarily?
Oh, completely.
Because I always wondered about that.
People took my call that because they were at home and had time, that I do not think that I could have convinced to talk to me. And I definitely could not have convinced them to come for an hour lecture all the way from wherever to New Haven, which, is essentially doing it for a week. It's a hard sort of proposition. I wouldn't have been able to afford it. And I would not have been able to get the dynamic combinations of people together. It was so much fun. And I also, frankly, I wouldn't have had the free time to think through what something like that would have felt like if I hadn't had, the awake in the middle of the night wondering what's going to happen next. And I kept thinking, well, plan something else. What artist would you like to talk to? Became my what's going to happen next.
Well, you did a great job. And Charlotte, what about you? Did you experience a similar kind of, well, it's a challenge, but we can shift gears in a good way?
Yes, I think it's a little bit different, but I went there, I moved back to France after more than 20 years in the US, and 3 weeks later, we have everything shut down, and I was, in this apartment. I live at Sèvres, in between the museum and the manufactory, and so it was a time for me to get to know the collection and to plan and to think. I went there for the renovation of the museum. So big projects, so we're constantly conversations through Zoom with my team, 6 curators. Some of them I've never met because I didn't have time. They were in vacation when I just came after a shutdown. So it was like a big moment of thinking, planning the future in a very traditional way, because that was what we knew at the time. And after time passed and the world has changed, and we have all seen that this COVID has changed things, our way of communicating, our way of organizing exhibition, our way of also our relationship with the public, also because so many lecture series have emerged from that period. So we have a public now that is not only the public that is coming in the museum, but a public that is basically all over the world with whom we can share our collection. So I realized that more and more I was moving with my old-fashioned project more and more it was not relevant, and I needed to adjust.
That was totally going to be my next question, that as we know, New Haven and Sèvres are not in the center of New York and Paris. And that notion of presence and, getting people in your door, but in a way, COVID trained you for a whole different platform, right? So how do you feel about the physical presence, the virtual presence, what you mean locally, globally? What goes on in your head about all that?
So on February 11th of 2022, we had a lecture that had more than, I think, 300 people, and it was at 9 a.m. in the morning. And the majority of people who came into that online lecture were people from mainland China.
That's the British Art Center.
And I just said, wow, what do I do with this? Because I don't know if that many people from mainland China have been to the museum collectively in our most populous year. And then I thought, will they ever come to see the museum? Will they come to see the collections up close? And then I realized I actually don't care, because they cared enough to come to that talk, so maybe they will go back to the website, maybe they will look at the objects online, and maybe it will spark visits from some of them. But this idea that this thing that felt so far away felt so close to them, that they would do that at 9 a.m. in the morning. I mean, it was amazing.
What about you?
So we didn't have the possibility to do an online lecture series like that, like many other museums. Sèvres really need renovation in many, many ways, and I still think that it's extremely important to bring the public in. Even after all of this experience, we have COVID, we have post-COVID, we are now in this new era of thinking, what do we keep from this period of time and what we want to transform, and I'm actually convinced that there is nothing more important than the experience of the visitor within the work, within the structure that is a museum. I see what you say, that with this lecture series and the digital collections, you can bring another public. Maybe some of them will come in at one point, maybe not, and it doesn't matter. At Sèvres, I don't have the choice to have both. I cannot do both options for financial reasons, for staff. I don't have the staff to do all of that. So I've decided that it is what I believe the most, is like to stay with this old-fashioned traditional way of renovation of a museum and trying to bring them physically into that institution. I may be wrong, history will tell, but I cannot do both at the same time, unfortunately, so I had to pick.
So following,
but I want to say that I have been asked, and it was really part of the conversation to say, but actually, why are we not more developing online? Why are we not putting our effort and money into that more global development, reaching out a public, and maybe we should kind of put a part or scale down the renovation projects. It's really part of the conversation. It's kind of almost happening now. And I believe really that we need to go with the full and put all of our effort and money into that full-scale renovation of an institution, and that after, in a second moment, we will develop a different way of bringing that public.
Please respond.
I think you're absolutely right, and I don't think what you're asking for is traditional at all. I think it is so smart, because people do have to come back in. Right now, we are closed for renovation, and the most important thing to me that is happening is that while we're closed, and while it seems as if we have gone back into the pandemic somehow, we've regressed, we have 3 off-site exhibitions that will happen, 2 in New Haven and 1 in Santa Fe over this next year. And they, in my mind, replicate each of the 3 floors of the institution that were the institution awake and alive. They would be there. And so I don't think you should sacrifice the chance to reopen and be better.
So My next question goes right into this notion of, is there something that you wish you could do that you know you can't do?
In general or in our museum?
Well, I mean, we're a friendly audience. I think you can discuss this in any way you like.
There are places that I wish that our collection could go. You know, I so wish that we could go to places where people could truly see us. I love the Asian model sometimes of going to shopping malls, shopping centers, and seeing, you know, art of a high quality. I wish that I could take our collection to small towns and places that, you know, don't have climate control, are not actual museums, you know, community centers, churches, things like that, because I would love to be able to sort of put the collection on the road in a real sense, where people could just, you live in a small town somewhere and you could happen upon something and it might change your perspective. And I know that, you know, I'm sure our registrars are watching this right now and worried with the idea of something like that, but that would be...
But you know, there are people now who think about, I don't know if any of you have heard of this, I know Eric Fischel was thinking about it, of creating trucks that are climate controlled, and you know, you bring your collection on the road around the country, and it just stops in a town, and then the walls of the truck come open, and but I mean, it's a fantastic recreation of a sort of 19th, early 20th century traveling music circus, but it's great art. I mean, very expensive, and I think you know, that was something he wanted to do. I don't think he was able to do it, but it was quite an idea, I think. And Charlotte, I mean, you've spoken a little bit about being on the, you know, is it virtual, is it real? But are there other things that you wish that you could do that you can't?
Yeah, actually I do, but it's completely unpolitically correct. So I hope it's okay. But because it's a Minister of Culture who said it as a wish to a 2023 New Year wish, I think I can repeat it. I think I wish that there is less bureaucracy in France and that things could be a little bit faster and that the people who actually direct museum can take the decision. Every money spent at the Public National Museum is public money, so it needs to be like level of decisions and authorization and lost in this I don't know where, and so we have to write a lot of notes, a lot of documents, and provide when actually it should be so simple and quick and just, you know, just trust and do it. And all of that is to justify the fact that it's public money that we need to spend, and the Ministry of Culture, you know, have a restricted budget or pretty important budget comparing to the US, but it needs to be really well spent, and I totally respect that. But there is really level of bureaucracy that is not complicated to navigate, but it just slows the process. So I will remove a little bit of that.
Yeah. Well, I have to say I'm very impressed with François and Gaëtan, who, you know, came to the offices of CCL and said, oh, we have this idea, and then a week later I was moderating conversations for a whole year. And so you skirt that bureaucracy in your genius of, you know, getting people to do things. Okay, this is my last question for you, which is, what keeps you up at night?
Well, the thing, I have a baby, so that keeps us up at night, but you know, it's not worry, it's just, he's awake, we're awake. You know, it is, the day-to-day pressures of the institution are still there, but I worry about things that maybe I shouldn't really worry about because, you know, I worry, is this thing, you know, is this program going to be interesting? Is this artist that we're inviting to work with us, is he or she going to be happy? You know, will there be people who will want to come back and see us in 2024? I worry about things like that because I do, many of the conversations I know that everyone is having across this country at least are about how museums are in turmoil, but I really do feel that maybe that agitation with museums is actually a sign of our own interest in them, as opposed to our disinterest. And so I keep hoping that people are pushing at the boundary of the museum because they want more from it, not less. So, but if they want less, that worries me.
That's really something to think about. Now we can all not sleep at night.
Sorry.
No, but I think that's so interesting about wanting more, because there certainly is turmoil now, and what that really is hard to understand. And Charlotte?
I wish I could stay awake at night thinking about so interesting and deeper things like that. But I am actually not sleeping that well this time, because we are in the middle of a pretty important, possibly, certainly, reunion, fusion with another institution. So more bureaucracy, more. So the future of Sèvres, as it's structured today, is likely going to change. And it's a lot of insecurity for the staff, for how it's going to happen. So it's no secret for a lot of French people that there is a rumor that Sèvres will join with the Mobilier National, with the other very large, oldest French manufacturer. And so two French manufacturers together, double of collections to deal, museums everywhere. So it's going to be interesting what's happening in the next couple of months. Yeah.
So I would love to open it up to you to ask questions of our distinguished panelists. Anybody have any thoughts?
What are the plans for your 200th anniversary?
Me?
Yeah, coming up.
Yes, I know. We are having an anniversary. We do. So in 2024, it will be 200 years celebration of the creation of the museum. And it's a very interesting internal debate of what are we going to do with this year. We also have the Olympic Games in Paris that same summer. So it's a lot of things happening. Programmation, and we will probably have an exhibition series, few small exhibitions celebrating big figures that had an influence or play a very important role in the history of the institution, or and actually maybe also some discussion, panel discussions over the year. To bring a better understanding of the collection and of its history. I think people don't really know the history of the museum, so that's the goal. But nothing completely set in stone at the moment. So we're planning this discussion.
Yeah, Tom.
For each of you, are there any exhibitions or juxtapositions of works? I know Courtney touched a little bit on it. Not in your museum, but you've seen in other institutions, big or small, in recent months that just blew you away and said, wow, that really opened my eyes to look at things in a fundamentally different way. That was just dazzling because it was just plain fun. Or because you really felt that it moved our understanding of appreciation forward in really profound ways.
This is mine is easy. Your former home, the Frick. Your former home, the Frick, is the place.
Is the place for inspiration?
Yeah.
I
keep going back.
Wrong with
Yeah.
it. Wrong with it.
Well, it's inside in the Frick. Bringing that collection into the Breuer is amazing, and I can't get enough. I want everyone. I feel like we're in a generational moment where if you get to see this, you will carry that with you for the rest of your life, and you'll go back to the Frick when it reopens at home. But there'll be school children. Maybe not exactly. You'll have to be over 12. Sorry. 10. Sorry. There'll be preteens and teens who will go and who will say, I saw that and now I understand something else and I'm bringing it back here, and it will change them.
Construction fun, it looks so like home.
It does.
I agree that the Frick experience is one of the most successful way of closing, reinventing its time of closure before rediscovering the collection in the new setting. So a big bravo to my colleagues and thank you for being here today. Yes, the Frick is a good example. Me again, very traditional, old-fashioned person. The big exhibition that are the monography approach of an artist, Donatello, Florence, Vermeer. I mean, it's just like, I love studying an artist, and again, I think it is important, and when we see the success that Vermeer can have, or even Donatello in Florence or in London, you realize that the public actually want that too, a really serious understanding of an artist, his life, what he did when he was young, how he changed, evolved, and I think we should continue. I want to continue to do that.
While you were thinking of your questions, I thought I'd ask you one more about the engagement with artists. And artist residencies are such a precious thing, especially I would think there's ceramics being made, and then there's the museum right there. And I know you have your, I don't actually know exactly, do you have scholars in residence? Yeah. So what about art? I mean, you engage with artists so much online. How do you engage with them in the museum and bring them in more? And do you feel this is a really critical thing that you have to do?
Absolutely, but it's very specific for us. So we had our first true artist in residence who came in, she came in the sort of late summer, early fall of 2019. She was the Bees Bus. And we made such big plans. She was going to show the film that she was making out of the objects in our collection. We were going to have her back. We had a complete idea built out, which of course never happened, except that it all happened online later. And it gave me this sense that we will never have the artist residency where you come and make work. We can't support that. But we can bring people in who are interested in the collection, and I am astonished by the number of artists who are really interested in our collection.
Us, we have a residency since the beginning of the institution, so it's a very, very long and deep relationship, and it's varied a lot with the artists. Some of them, actually an American, Christine McCurley, who lives now in France, has really been in residence several times over the last almost 10 years, did several body of work, completely engaged with the archive of Sèvres. We have all of the archive of the institution, drawings, plaster mold, etc. I will restudy the production of Sèvres. I completely reinvent the history medium inspired in a very, very, very good way. I'm actually doing a show with her next exhibition, 6 Women, she's one of them. And so that is really, really very deep engagement, but it's because she wanted it, she wants it. Other artists, for example, Giuseppe Pennon, he came once, twice, did his things, body of work, and moved to something else. So it's completely, it's extremely open at Sèvres how the artists want to get to be involved with the institution. I want them to really get to know the collections and the archives and immerse themselves, but some of them don't have time, are not interested, and what they do, it's very good too. I mean, it's really, yes?
I'm interested in what the process is like in selecting these artists that you engage with.
I'm interested in knowing what your process is like in engaging with these artists, like selecting the artists that you work with. And if there's anything in particular that you look for, whether it's in their work or in their personal or the context, cultural context of the time.
It's very complicated, it's very slow, there is several committees. We vote, we change our mind, and we go back. And at the end, it depends on which artist is interested at the moment. But it's true that we have several committees with members that are inside of the institution, with advising from outside. We're meeting, wondering what next. Everybody has ideas of who should work with us. We also have a lot, maybe once a week, spontaneous artist who just are going to send us his body of work, letters, and asking to do a residence with us. So we consider a little bit everything, and the policy of who our editorial line, I would like to say, vary quite a lot, and it depends also what the manufacturing, and I'm the director of the museum and the patrimony, so everything is story. There is another director of the manufacturing, and that person also has a big voice of what they want to do. But we tried, at least for the last 3 years and several months that I've been there, to have always designers, artists, painters, sculpture, try to have French and non-French, and of course try to have more women that we had in the past. And so we tried to find an interesting balance, and so that's it.
My process is very different. It's more about cajoling. And so I call people and say, I have a feeling that you're really interested, and really try to have conversations. And I'm involved in a few conversations right now. I'm really hoping that Veronica Ryan, for example, who just won the Turner Prize, will come, because I know that she is interested in objects in our collection. And so I try to figure out what I think that people might be interested in, but there's not a single artist that I know that I haven't tried to garner interest from them about it, because I think there's something there for them. Yeah. There's no committee.
I wish that I had a process like that, but it's not the case.
So Daniela.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer you this opportunity.
Wait.
Hi, sorry. I just want to offer you both an opportunity to speak a little bit about, we're all living in Buffy's world in this series, but in the sense of how has your experience been inflected by the fact that you're both women leaders, right? That is sort of why we're here. That's the premise of the series, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. We're not.
Well, I had a question that I didn't ask about, does anybody remind you that you're a woman in part of your leadership of the museum?
Every day.
Every day. See? Like how? Now we're really talking. Okay. Now I'm fascinated. I'm not surprised either.
In some ways, I think it's benign. It's no different than the rest of the world that, you are aware of gender in that sense. In other ways, I'm fascinated by it. I do feel as if, there is sometimes a conversation that happens around what I think about as the hard facts. So, we're going through a renovation right now, and so I think sometimes that people feel that they need to explain a bit of the technical aspect to me a bit more, perhaps, than they would otherwise. But then, I come back to some of the great female architects that I know, and I quote them liberally and say, here, this is how I think it should be done. But then there are other ways that I do think that people expect empathy from us. But I think that's true across the board. I think you could be, I thought that when I was a teacher as well.
Me, it's a little different again because I'm surrounded by women, so I don't feel that I don't have this feeling, and I actually think that I feel that I'm surfing also on a moment where people want women. So there is a lot of space for women, and we want to hear them, and we give them that platform. So I actually feel that I benefit from that moment. That was probably not the case 10 years ago. So I feel listened. After, it's more about the agenda. That's, absolutely no sense that we kind of family or children to pick up. That's just like doesn't exist. We need to be and have to do it all. But I have to say that was the case before. So I think it's just being a woman. You just have to do it all.
Well, one question for Courtney. You talked more directed to Courtney. You talked about wondering whether people want more out of museums or less. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Any experience you've had with your community at large challenging you in one way or another? Positive things that came out of that or challenges?
So one of the things that we did for our talk series was that we began to put posters of these large-scale posters on the front of our building. We were closed, by the way, when this was happening. So my expectation was that you were walking around New Haven aimlessly, and you would happen upon a museum, and you'd wonder, I wonder what's going on, even though you knew the museum was closed, because everything was closed. But you'd see these large-scale posters that had the faces of all of the people that were giving talks in that particular month or season or what have you. And one of the things that I heard from people about that is that it gave them a sense of hope around what the museum might be like when it reopened. And I loved that as an idea that this would allow you to imagine, because I do think that kind of the space of the imaginary could have closed, during the pandemic. I think for a lot of people, the despair of it, it was traumatic, and yet, lots of things that we did, it did involve the kind of just walking around town, because there was nowhere ultimately to go other than to go back to home. And so I think that it sort of gave us something. I also, sometimes I think that we assume, I shouldn't say we, I sometimes assume that when something feels contentious, so when I'm reading the New York Times and there's yet another story about, something that's happening in a museum, and it doesn't seem as positive as I feel that museums are, I wonder if that's actually a sign that people just are really excited about what goes on and want to have a hand in it, want to have a place in it, as opposed to wanting to shut the door. That's the contention made me worried at first.
I think that's a really good note to end on, because it gives us something to think forever. So thank you for coming. That was great.
Just want to invite you to have a glass. You can stay with us and have the speakers. Thank you.